there's that music again. We probably ought to get a different soundtrack.
Something a little peppier.
A little peppier, because
Yes.
that piano player is like on downers.
That was on one of your quiet days. And I'm a little wound up today, so.
You are wound up today.
Yeah, I am. So do you want to bring us in officially and do the announcing part, like who we are and where we are?
I guess we probably ought to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. You're watching, if you haven't figured it out yet, Talking Point Live. My name is Eric Young, and I'm here with my good friend Jen Kohler. And this is our 4th year.
I don't know. I'm not good at counting.
I guess in seasons, that makes our 8th season in doing the show. And
sounds impressive.
We wonder why we keep showing up.
Why we still have jobs. Yeah.
Well, why do we keep showing up? You wanted to kind of give
I did, because it's
reintroduction
the beginning of
to
a new
this,
semester.
right?
Like, why are we doing this, right? And so for me, the why is not to tell anybody what to think, but to provoke some thinking, thought-provoking, right? So when you're in a conversation with somebody you find engaging, sometimes you find yourself maybe thinking about things differently or deepening your own understanding. So we're really here to be thought-provoking, hopefully, and provide a service to the community. And because we're teachers and that's what we like to do, is thought-provoke.
Right.
Yeah.
A little bit of background on that. Both Jen and I teach in the media studies side of our communication department. Actually, I teach on the human communication side of that too. You're teaching in voice and civility, and
both sides.
Both sides as well.
Media and society,
Right.
and voice and civility and public discourse.
So we're taking some actual theory and maybe interjecting it into what it is that we're talking about, as well as the anecdotal stuff that's out there that we want to run across on a regular basis in teaching our students here on campus. And we are coming to you live from the campus of Dixie State University. I think we've got a lot. Oh, and the views and opinions of both of us expressed on the show do not reflect those of the Community Education Channel or Dixie State University or the general population
Or
of
our
Washington County.
spouses or children. Right? Yes.
So you are wound up.
I am,
And
yeah.
you wanted to kick this off with that.
Yes. Okay, well, here's the thing. You and I have agreed in the past that we're not going to talk about the show, what we're going to do, hardly at all before we do it.
Before the
because
show.
We've figured out that sucks the energy
We go
out
through
of
the whole show,
Right,
and
and
then when
then-
it comes time to tape it, we don't have anything to say.
So we don't really know, and we like it that way. So the thing for me was, just this morning, I was listening to one of my favorite podcasts. It's called Lawfare, and is produced by the Brookings Institution. And Ben Wittes, who's the host, was talking to Jack Goldsmith, and then another fellow by the name of David Chris, I believe. I'm
Okay.
not clear on the third person, but they had a very unscripted show as well.
And who are these guys?
Okay,
Give
so
us some
Jack
context.
Goldsmith, it fascinates me because he came to the Justice Department during the George W. Bush administration.
You were going to say regime.
I was, but I said administration. And he was in the Justice Department when they pushed back against the torture memos and these enhanced interrogation techniques and said, you know what, as the Justice Department, we cannot sign off on this anymore.
And this all came to light in terms of, can you give us some more history in terms of why were we even questioning the idea of torture in terms of enhanced interrogation? What was the context of that?
Well, what I remember is, Abu Ghraib came out
Okay.
in, I think it was '04,
Okay.
those pictures. And I don't know if those, if it was simultaneous, or are you thinking of something
Yes.
specific
No.
that kicked it off?
No,
Okay.
I'm thinking the same thing in terms
Yeah.
of Guantanamo, what was going on.
Right.
And then suddenly we were faced with images of our own soldiers engaged in very questionable interrogation tactics, which raised the question.
Well, but I think the question was raised in the Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel before, separate.
Right.
I think Goldsmith
Prior
and
to.
some other people said, this is torture and we're not going to sign off on it.
But that's not what you want to talk about. That's
No,
that's
but,
the impetus to.
But the thing that kicked them off and that really resonated for me was this idea of violating norms.
Okay.
So they were saying, should the intelligence community people, especially current members of it and retired members, be going around criticizing the President of the United States? That's against the norm for that community, the intelligence community.
So in case you haven't been paying any attention at all, and I don't know how that's
How can
possible
you not?
anymore.
No, yes.
The intelligence community is under great fire, including the likes, of course, of James Comey, of
Michael Hayden,
Clapper,
John Brennan,
and Brennan, all all of which are at risk of losing their intelligence, their security clearances. And that means a lot to these individuals because the basis of their being is to have access to information in order to advise what's happening with the country in terms of national security, right? So, but they've spoken up. They've gone against that norm that you're talking about, and they've been critical of the President of the United States. And the President of the United States doesn't like that. And when he doesn't like things, he tries to go through and subjugate whatever communication channels might be out there that could continue that kind of criticism. So the norm being...
You're supposed to be apolitical.
Okay.
Meaning you're, and see, this thing that's interesting is the argument made on the show was, well, say you're in this situation we're in now, and if you don't speak up, is that silent consent? And then you're being political by actually not pushing back against contradictions of what you know to be true. So if you're keeping silent just because you don't want to appear to be political, maybe that's a political position you're taking by keeping silent.
So omission of an opinion
back.
would still be an indication. Would that be an indication that they are in concert with the current?
Sometimes silence can be construed as consent.
Okay.
And we know this from famous cases in history, right?
Right.
So the point was, Goldsmith was saying, okay, and they were debating, should they speak up? How much should they speak up? And Goldsmith's point was, is it effective for what you want to achieve? And he was saying that when John Brennan, for example, veers off and starts criticizing on topics outside of his expertise, outside of what he knows to be correct information in the IC and community, when he starts criticizing immigration policy or other policies, now he's becoming more of a political agent because he's not speaking to his wheelhouse, if you will.
Those policies don't speak directly to the security of the country.
Correct. So then it starts to be more of a political position rather than just sticking to pushing back on truth or error. If
the Director of Homeland Security spoke to those, that would still be within that wheelhouse?
Right,
Would that be okay?
Yeah, I think lately it's called staying in your lane. So if you
right.
stay in your lane and your area of expertise and responsibility.
But this current administration doesn't want anybody in any lane.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So anyway, they were debating that. And so what came up for me was a very interesting thing. They were saying, violating the norms. You know, the president is so violating all the norms related to appropriate speech and communication that maybe we're forced in response in this extraordinary situation to also consider violating norms that we would normally be observing. Normal norms, right? And so I found myself thinking, oh my gosh, this happened to me the other day. I was in church and we were having this lesson from the Old Testament. And on the board, the teacher was writing down the qualities of what makes a good king or a good leader. And it was often spoken, a good leader. So things like honesty, integrity, respect, compassion. And we must have had
listening to intelligence briefing.
We must have had a dozen adjectives on the board.
Okay.
And it was all I could do to keep my mouth shut and not say, none of which reflect the character of our current leader of our country. None of which. And then I thought to myself, well, you can't say that in this context. That would be violating the norm of mixing, you know, of introducing political positions into a religious discussion. Okay? That would be violating a norm. And so I didn't think that term violating a norm at that moment, but I was very conscious of violating an unspoken.
But we have religious contexts being introduced daily into political contexts, so why not?
Now here's what you're doing. You're doing the what about thing, right?
That's what I do.
Yes, you're doing the what about thing, and I'm just saying I'm not going to play the what about game.
That's what the show's about.
No, because you can't say two wrongs
I'm not saying two
make a
wrongs.
right. You're saying, well,
all I'm saying is contextually, okay, we have a number of contexts happening here. We have a cultural context, which would be the idea of a belief system or a value system, a set of ideals, that kind of thing. And then we have a social context, and that's the roles and the rules that we're playing with. So in church, in a Sunday school lesson, you're saying that the social context says, well, that's the instructor and I'm the student, but yet because of the cultural context of this being religious, I can't go through and say, oh, well, that certainly doesn't reflect our current administration, because it introduces a political idea into that. And yet we have so many political situations where religion is introduced regularly to go through and justify the policies like immigration with Jeff Sessions or with Mike Pence, to go through and justify the actions, some of which, what a summer, my gosh, in terms of separating kids from families, all the infractions that were going on in the name of the United States.
So are you saying that there in fact has been a breach or
it's turnabout fair play?
Right, because the actual separation has disintegrated? I mean, there is no more separation, or because tit for tat?
Well, that's what I'm asking, I guess. And I don't have an answer to that question. I don't think, I'm not an absolutist. I have a hard time saying it's all whatever that might be, everything, all, those are terms of extreme or terms of absolutism.
Okay.
And I don't think we have lost the separation, because I think there's still people fighting for that. However, locally here in the state of Utah, as far as Proposition 2 is concerned, when the LDS Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has chimed in and said, we are counseling to not support this proposition in terms of medical. It's like I've been smoking it this morning myself. Medical marijuana.
Which we know is not true.
It's not true. Just
to clarify.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Where we don't have that separation.
Okay.
There's this obfuscation of those concepts of what's going on, and it goes against the norm that you're talking about. But the norm that we were talking about earlier just goes back to, why can't we just talk about this?
Correct. So
why we're talking about it now.
I have kind of a what you call I'm the oldest kid in my family. So my personality is to push a little bit against the norms.
Oh, okay. You're the disruptor?
Well, I feel entitled somehow to be a disruptor in my family. Because
Okay.
I was the oldest kid,
Okay.
3 little brothers, and I was required to do a lot of, minding and bossing around.
Sure.
The big sister. So I feel entitled to be a little bit disruptive. And I do not have respect for conventions that fly in the face of logic just for the sake of convention. So I don't mind pushing against a norm if I think it's valid to do so. I think it's healthy.
But you didn't say anything in Sunday school.
I did not say anything in Sunday school. And I don't even know, thinking about it now consciously, if I would say something or not.
What
frankly.
difference would it have made anyway?
Well, it would have irritated some people, no doubt.
Okay.
And it may have detracted from the focus of the lesson material.
Well, we're talking about leadership qualities.
We are.
You're talking about the vacancy of
right,
the current
and we are
vacancy
supposed to apply the scriptures to ourselves. We are counseled to do that. So they're not just a dead story that happened several thousand years ago that we don't care about.
Right.
So that would have been a direct application to our current situation. So it would have been legitimate in that point of view. But
would you have defended it that way?
Now I'm just now thinking of that.
You are now.
I wouldn't have thought
It's one of those
it.
things, oh, I wish I would have said
But
this.
people would have probably maybe been too polite to object as well. I mean,
Well,
we're a bunch of very polite
it's
people.
church, we're on our best behavior.
Well, we are, and we should be, I think. But I don't know, frankly, how I would land on that. But the point Goldsmith was making, he was saying, okay, let's say you push back, you speak truth to power, or you kick against the norms. Is it going to be effective? And he was saying that he feels like Brennan, maybe in particular, is undermining his own case and appearing to be political, and then playing into the hand of the president who claims it's political. So what we want to do in communication, we always say, you want to be effective in getting your message across, right? You want to be effective in persuading to your point of view.
So how do you do that?
Well, so that's the question. And so
Well, let's answer it.
know your audience.
First off,
First
know your
off,
audience.
yeah.
So who is the audience? Is Trump the audience?
Well, and
Is
that's,
Congress, the Senate the audience? Is Trump's base the audience? Or are we just preaching to the choir to the rest of us that way?
well, I would say in the case of I see people coming out and spouting their criticisms, there's the national audience, like you say, there's constituents audience, there's the intelligence community audience that is definitely, according to these guys, their morale is really at an all-time low. So when former leaders speak out in their defense, it helps morale for that audience. There's an international audience listening to the discourse that goes on in our country. So there are multiple audiences. So you could make the case that depending on who the audience is, it's more or less effective.
Or impossible, because we're not going to reach all of the expectations with our communication objectives with that diverse of an audience out there.
Okay.
When I say we, so there's the audience side, but what's the broadcast side? What's the speaker side? And what messages? So we're talking about members of the intelligence community coming forward and being critical of the president that's pushing up against the norms, and they're running a risk of having their security clearances revoked as a response to speaking truth to authority. Who's left to speak? Because obviously there aren't many left in the GOP. The last person who spoke truth to authority just died.
Oh, I'll tell you, I'm so glad I read that book by John McCain just last week before he
passed away.
I
feel we lost a huge, important voice that would stand up to what's going on in terms of, and I keep saying that in terms of I need to get away from doing that in the show. It's my nervous tick to go away and pause for me to catch up with my next thought. But John McCain was the loyal opposition in his own party, in fact. And I don't know who's left.
I'm glad you brought him up specifically because...
No pun intended with left. I mean left in terms of remaining, not left in terms of...
I'm glad you brought it up because I remember thinking, listening to that book and him telling his story, that I found, again, a spot for myself in the Republican Party.
I did too.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Did you?
I know that might be surprising to you.
Yeah.
Technically, I guess I'm a fiscal conservative, and I'm a social liberal in that respect. And a lot of people might argue that those two just, will never be on the same page.
But then you can look at people like McCain.
Yeah, who had that ability to reach across the aisle.
And here's the thing. He's a Republican, no question. Donald Trump, in my mind, is not.
He's not a Republican.
A Republican. He's the head of... He got the Republican
nomination. He's the head of Donald Trump, period.
Right. He's a Trumpian, and that's it in my book. But speaking of John McCain, another thing that I'm so happy to realize about him is he wasn't perfect. He made some decisions, and he freely admits some of the mistakes that he made.
The whole campaign finance fiasco.
Right.
But then that led to campaign finance reform. Not to defend McCain. We had the whole Keating 5 situation.
Exactly. But so it just goes to show, I don't expect my leaders to be perfect. I don't, because I don't expect that of myself. I do my best, but I always fall short. And I think as humans, that's life. So I expect people to learn.
Why can't we digest information at that level, though?
What do you mean?
Well, the first crack of that perfection ceiling was arguably, and due to the press and to the proliferation of the press, was Watergate, right?
Okay.
Where, for the first time, we doubted the integrity of the highest office in the country, if not at that time of the world. And then along comes William Jefferson Clinton, who gets into even dirtier dirt and besmirches a young woman
and lies. Right.
But yeah, and he's a terrible liar. But we can't see beyond that. This is a guy, Clinton left office with a 68% approval rating, the highest approval rating of any sitting president in the history of the United States.
That's amazing.
Why?
Right. He had some good policies and some bad policies.
But as soon as we discuss Clinton, the first thing that comes up is, I did not have sex with that woman.
Right.
Right?
The lying.
The lie.
Right. Well.
So my point being, and at a risk of maybe even contradicting myself here, we still have this impossible standard of perfection, of this character, this integrity that has to exist within that highest office. At least there's an expectation of that. And safe to say, the majority of us have been let down repeatedly,
I don't know
over
how
and
you
over
can
and
even
over.
say we have this expectation, because clearly we don't.
Because because we're not rising to that
we
expectation?
elected somebody who manifested a lack of this perfection through the whole process. So why
Who's
do you...
we? You got a mouse in your pocket? Because...
Well, I'm saying we as a nation.
Okay.
Because before anything else, we're both Americans. So we have to bear some responsibility as Americans for the situation we're in.
Well,
don't you think?
I do.
Okay.
And that onus falls on to the ballots that we cast.
Yes. But I'm just saying, as a nation, as Americans, we elected somebody who clearly did not demonstrate the
let me
qualities
bring this back around
you're
full
saying
circle
we demand.
in terms of going against the norm. Why can't we speak out about this even more? Why can't you and I go through and say, this was a terrible decision, we need to revisit this, we need to talk to our representatives on the Hill, in the Senate, in Congress, and demand an impeachment process to go through and remove this individual?
I've heard a really good case against impeachment. The good case I heard was impeachment's always...
Why not the 25th Amendment then?
Well, they always land as a political maneuver.
It's all going to land as a political maneuver.
But if you just vote a person out of office, it doesn't become a political maneuver.
Yeah,
and
then we have a full term of destruction that happens up until that point.
Okay, but here's where I'm not so... where I'm optimistic. If you look at what's been going on this first 2 years, basically, okay, we have stayed on the rails, basically, because the judiciary, the legislative, and parts of the executive branches of government have been pushing back and managing to keep our institutions are strong enough, and the dedicated public servants, bureaucrats included, legislators, judiciary, they have been, it's a good example of the strength of our institutions that we're keeping it together.
That we're still functioning on some level.
Yes, and that we...
Even though he rattles a saber, threatens to shut down the government.
In spite of all of the craziness, the lunacy.
Okay.
I
appreciate that viewpoint.
So I am not afraid of finishing the 4 years. I am not afraid. I think we can do it. And speaking of finishing the 4 years, we have a debate here in town on the 17th of September at the Eccles with Chris Stewart, our current congressional representative in the House, and a Democratic contender, Shireen Ghorbani. And I believe that just yesterday they taped an interview with her here. Lane Rano did on his show to tell a story.
Right.
So folks in the community can look for that interview on our local television station on Channel 22, CEC, and get to know her a little bit better. But I'm looking for Chris Stewart, and I haven't researched, his statements on Trump. I'm looking to see a McCain-like pushback, because in McCain's book, he must have tackled every single objection he had to President Trump's vitriol and bigotry and bias, one by one, and pushed back hard. And I'm looking for Chris Stewart and Mitt Romney, who I don't think should be an automatic shoo-in. I want to see some serious pushback. I want to see some statesmanship.
What do you base that expectation on, especially with Chris Stewart and that pushback?
Well,
what's the evidence that
I'm going to get it?
Yeah.
Well, I'm asking for it as a constituent. I'm saying, if you want my vote, you might be a good guy, you might have done a reasonable job so far in Congress. If you want my vote,
you got to stand up.
I want to see some stand up.
You need to go against the norm.
You do. You do. To take the risk that the lunatic fringes of the Republican Party, who have been terrorizing the moderates in the party, you need to stand up to those people.
Some might argue that he was part of that fringe.
Some would argue that, but I'm just saying now's an opportunity.
Okay.
You're running for re-election. You can evolve.
Sure.
Right? You can evolve in
office.
You?
So that was the other part that we were talking about. Can you change?
Yeah, absolutely, yes. People are capable of change. I believe that.
Can you change, though, the very political foundation upon which you got your office?
You make a good point. You were voted into office with a mandate to represent people,
right.
Okay? But I think when you get into office, you have a responsibility to make ethical and moral choices that are, to choose the right, if you will, over the majority. And sometimes the majority can be wrong. So I would say.
There you go again, against the norm.
Well, actually, if you look at it, though, there's a tradition in our country, right, of electing people
Right.
who we rely on their ethics and their moral judgment and their
As a
intelligence.
republic.
We rely on them, right,
Okay.
to make good decisions.
Okay.
And so I think we have a lot of respect for their right to get into office and say, you know what? You might have voted me in on immigration or building a wall, but I figured out building a wall is not the smart way to go. So, even though you wanted, you voted me in on a wall, I'm thinking that's not the right thing and I'm not going to vote for it.
But the wall wasn't sincere. The wall was rhetoric just to get elected, just to get the power.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying as far as the responsibility
Sure.
of the elected representative
Okay.
to the constituents,
So,
right?
as constituents, we should be flexible enough to be able to go through and say, okay, well, in light of new information, new evidence, or new circumstances, or new contexts, I should allow you to be able to shift your position
Absolutely.
in the best interest of the
As a
country.
matter of fact, if you're not evolving when you're in office, what are you doing? I mean, are you not learning anything?
Mitt Romney was lambasted as a flip-flopper as a result
Right.
of this same kind of thinking.
Yeah.
Again, it pushes back against the set primary certitudes of you should take a position and you should hold on to that regardless of what's going on, which is partisanship by definition.
Who's leading the lambasting? It's people they get in the media that don't care about the truth, that only care about stirring up people.
That's the whole parallel.
Yeah.
The same reasons why politicians don't shift off their platforms upon which they were voted is because they don't want to lose the vote.
Right.
Are the same reasons why pundits go through and continue to stir that up, even though it's a terrible idea to do to the people.
I mean, they do it for their job security.
Absolutely, they do it
Yeah.
for the ratings. They do
Right.
it. Yeah, there's a strong parallel there.
Right.
And we're the victims. I hate to say that. We're the willing ignorant to not open our eyes to see that machine working so well to go through and divide us on levels upon which we've never been divided before.
Although you say never been divided before, and I'm just thinking of the earlier colonial days between Jefferson and Adams, and
Can you get your students to relate to those days?
I'm just saying those people were pretty divided, and it was pretty nasty.
Yeah.
I don't know. Think of the Vietnam War era. And Civil Rights era. I'm not really sure we've always,
Have we been united?
When we were that united.
Yeah,
and I'm not
okay.
even sure that's necessary.
Yeah, and I might be speaking in hyperbole.
Do you know what I mean
Yeah,
by that?
yeah.
But maybe because we're a democracy, that's what makes us great, is that we don't agree on everything. And so because we don't automatically agree, we have to principled compromise. And that's another thing. This idea of compromise being a dirty word, for McCain, principled compromise is where it's at. And that's another thing I'm
how he
looking
led.
for as a constituent.
Yeah.
Principled compromise.
Well, that's what we need to be looking for in our candidates.
Yeah.
Here. Well, we're coming down to about 90 seconds. If you've got something to add to our conversation, we ask you to please join us. And you're welcome to do that on our Facebook page, which is facebook.com/talkingpointlive. And I'll be going, typically I monitor what's happening with that feed
That's okay.
on the air, but I don't even have
Yeah.
my laptop with me.
That's all right.
And my reader's broke. And I can't even see. I'm lucky to see that we only have a minute left.
Okay.
So how do you want to wrap this up?
Well, I just say that, you and I are doing this because we want to provoke some thought from
We want to
people.
get a discussion
and we
going.
want people to be talking around the dinner table of their families.
We want to
and
push back against the norm,
Yeah.
too.
And figure out where you as a citizen, where you should be pushing back.
All right. All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll see you 9:30 on Wednesdays, coming to you live, or obviously you can pick us up anytime on Facebook or on the Community Education Channel, Channel 22.
Yes, sir.
All right. I don't know why I can't remember it. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you this time next week.